So let me be in my role as Clerk of Gifts and Leadings and welcome everybody to this this episode in our series of highlighting members of our meeting who carry ministries that are not formally under the care of the meeting. And we heard from quite a few people over the winter, and Chuck was going to be in the spring, but needed to be pushed back to the fall. So this is the final one in this particular series. It's an opportunity to let folks in the meeting get to know our members more deeply. And so Chuck will speak out of the silence, and there'll be some time at the end for questions and fuller sharing. So welcome, Chuck Esser. We're so glad to have you here.
Well, it's good to be with you, friends, today, and to get to look out and see people in their squares and people gathered at the meeting. And it's been a gift to actually try to think about how to talk about my kind of being led through my life and where I am now. And I thought I would start with a poem that I wrote a while ago to my a 10-year-old young person who is one of my godchildren who I'm close to. And it kind of, in my mind, speaks to, still speaks very much to what my calling is in life. So this is a poem called, "So What's a Few Thousand Years?" Part 1. Imagine long-lived, benign beings viewing us from other galaxies. From their lofty thousands of years, there would be no difference between human 10-year-olds and our oldest members. Let's listen in on their conversation about us. Those humans, they are very smart. If only they could know that they are okay just as they are. But I remember our first few hundred years, the mastery of our first 40 languages before we figured out direct communication. The unsure apprenticeship of our first 6 or 7 careers before we had the confidence that we were excellent masons, plumbers, doctors, parents, actors, ball players, typists, geologists, and we knew we could master anything and more quickly each time we tried. The urgency and confusion of feelings and the distortion that unrecovered hurts forced on us. How many years, how many lovers did it take until we knew and remembered that we were loved and that our loving whomever we pleased was just right? If only we could grant those humans self-confidence to be themselves, to take pleasure in their difference, to create unity with their vast intelligence. Part 2. My hometown recently did a survey of octogenarians. They were asked, what would you do differently if you could start over again? To everyone's surprise, Money, power, and fame were low on the list. Number one on the list was, I wish I would have dared to risk so I would be remembered as someone who made this world a better place. Not far behind was, I wish I would have loved more courageously to have never let caution, fear, embarrassment get in the way of saying, I love you, and acknowledging our closeness and power. Part 3. By the end of the century, scientists think they will have one set of laws that describe and hold true for the smallest particle and the vastness of space. We've been working on a similar description of our relationship that describes our separate uniqueness and our joined closeness and power. When you complete my sentences with the words I would have chosen, when my blind path finds you on your way to the basket, when one of us knows the other needs to cry and finds the right way to let the tears flow, when we work together to make things go well for others, I know we can have each other and ourselves too. As I approach this new year, I know there will always be years between our ages. We will experience life from different views, think different thoughts, have different struggles. But even in human terms, 1, 2, 10, or 30 years shrink into meaninglessness with the passage of time. Looking back on our lives from the vantage point of our intergalactic friends, it seems obvious that we should decide each day to remember that we're not alone, to act on the fact that we are enough, and enjoy the deep reassurance of each other's lives to create the world we dream possible. So I think that's kind of a description of how I view us all in God's hands. And I thought, as thinking about talking about this, where should I really start? And I think that I need to start with where I started, which was growing up in Kutztown in a very Pennsylvania Dutch community where my family was very religious and they were Lutherans. And the early experience I had as a child around callings and religion was that God is love. And that we were each given chances to be alive, different possessions, different talents, and we were to use those to make this world a better place. And both of my parents had been in World War II in the military. And recently I've been looking at some of my father's notes. He was in most of the conflicts in the South Pacific, one of the few survivors in his unit. And by the end of the war, he came back and really saw that war needed to end as a human endeavor. And he was conflicted in many ways, but that there was something about that. He destroyed all the guns in the family, did that kind of thing. When I was 13, I went with our congregation of young people to the National Lutheran Convention, I met a remarkable person there. I seem to have had a chance to meet many wonderful mentors in my life, but I met James Baldwin, and he was very kind to me and took time to answer all my questions about racism. And they were 13-year-old questions of someone who had never met a Black person before. Now, he may have been also interested in me in other ways, but it was just a gift. And I've experienced this gift so many times from so many different mentors, but it was like coming from this small place, getting to see the whole world in a different way. There were some particular values in my community. The Pennsylvania German community is, that I grew up in was, and particularly after the war, where most people had been in battle or in concentration camps. One of my neighbors had been in Auschwitz. That people were pretty damaged, but the sense of community was extremely strong, and the thing that everyone in town took care of each other. And my grandparents did that, my father did that, my mother did that. There was no one who was left out. So our family Sundays were often tables with many neighbors. And we had a very large community of caring about each other. And I feel very lucky to have that ethnic background and to have that sense of what community can be and the strength, no matter what your political views are, no matter what any views are, of putting each other's lives first and the well-being of us all together first. There were also a lot of things that came to me as revelations repeatedly during my early life. Some of them would be termed mystical by people, but I had a number of life and death experiences, starting with being born and being disabled at birth, and then dying and being brought back to life when I was 15 months old after drowning, and then again dying when I was 15 years old from a burst appendix and being brought back to life. And each of those kind of gave me a picture of the gift of being alive. What a gift that God gave me. And I can remember particularly when I was 15, and you know, I grew up in a very mixed class background. My parents kind of, my father's family had a print shop, and but that the idea that you know, like there wasn't, people didn't see a lot of things that happened around them, and so some of the medical things that happened to me, people didn't notice, and I had to make noise in order for people to notice enough to get me to a doctor or the hospital. But when I was 15 and going into the hospital and they were going to emergency surgery, I prayed to God and said, because I noticed something, I said, God, if you give me the chance to stay alive, I will not hold back on expressing my love for people, starting with my parents. Because at that point, you know, when you're 14, 15, 16, often your family doesn't know much about your life and what it's really like. And so I got a chance to be alive, and that's been a continued thing I go back to, is just the gift of life for everyone. I'll take a breath here. So I guess the next thing to talk about here is Quakers, because my grandfather really thought that Quaker education was the best. I went through public schools in my through junior high school and the beginning of high school, but he I was having a very hard time at school, mostly because of some of the early traumas. It was very hard for me to learn things the way most people learn things, and there was a lot of violence in my town also, a lot of internalized kind of feelings where people picked on each other and so forth. And I wanted very much to leave in some particular ways. And my grandfather talked me into going to George School for a couple of years. And that was my first contact with Quakers. And I worked while I was at George School. I worked at Byberry State Mental Hospital after school and saw, all these people who were interned and made friends with them. Our job was to play games with the people who were inmates. And all these questions started to come up for me about what mental illness, does it exist? Or are we incarcerating people because they're poor? And the same kind of questions came up to me in going to Quaker work camps in Philadelphia, where we had lots of chances to have discussions about our country and racism. And the beginning of discussion about gay oppression. So there were these gifts that weren't actually part of the curriculum at all at George School, but that became part of things. And I should say, even at that point, I was somewhat of a radical. I was doing a lot of organizing work, some of the early work about challenging the George School rules around the equality of women and men as far as what they wore and other things like this. And so, and there was a theme, even when I was very small, about organizing young people against the oppression of being young. So that was something that was a calling somehow I could see. And I became a proctor at George School too, and went through a lot of things with one of the young people committing suicide that I was close to. Some people getting thrown out of the school because of their political points of view and things like that. But there was this foundation of that Quakers also go about doing things in the world to make it a better place. I then went with the AFSC upon graduation to Chicago to be a work camp person building a Black art center in South Chicago. When Martin Luther King came to the open housing campaign and was able to persuade the AFSC to allow us young people to participate. And those were some of my early experiences of getting shot at for my beliefs, people throwing stones, getting to see what mass violence can look like. And also what courage looks like. And I met many other really wonderful mentors then, one of whom was Mary Wallace and Bernard Lafayette. Got to meet Mahalia Jackson. And what shone through on that was their concern about everybody. they took me under their wings, in so many ways. It's including some of my young Black friends who I met in Robert Taylor Homes. And it was once again a calling, that somehow this is where we get to make the world right, the way it should be for all human beings. And that was the time period when I also had some deep soul searching and guidance about conscientious objection to war. And Mary Wallace in particular stood by me while I wrote my nonviolence story. And my draft board in Kutztown was not going to approve this, and neither was the Lutheran Church. But I found, starting to talk about it and really having the support of these few adults, that even though my parents were completely against me at that point on this score, that there were two ministers in town who joined me in taking on the Lutheran Church of America and changing their policy about supporting conscientious objection. And we won. And I became a conscientious objector. So I guess part of it was that one doesn't do this alone. One has the calling, the vision, the spiritual direction, and people find you, and you find people, and together you shift things. I went on from there. Oh, I said we'd go about 20 minutes. This is about 20 minutes. I'm going to stop for a minute. We're going to take a 2-minute stretch break where people get to stretch. And during this stretch break, I'm going to show a very short slideshow that you'll get a sense of some of the communities that my leadings have led me through. And I have to share my screen here. And so when we do our stretch break, you'll get a chance to see this. Okay, I'm coming back to you now again. I guess part of, some of those pictures are also of things I've done with our meeting together. But I feel extremely, it's not just lucky, but led to connection with people in many places. And I always come away learning and also more deeply connected. So I'm going to pick up the story and move towards what, we're this calling towards being part of creating a new society together based in love has led me more recently. So after working with the American Friends Service Committee in Chicago, I'd wanted to stay, but I was kind of too scared at that point to not go on to college. And I went to Earlham College, which was a different kind of contact with Quakers, and met many mentors there. But there was something that I felt like I was at that point pretty involved in the anti-war movement, and was very quickly attracted to Arthur Kanigis and the Maripol boys, who the Rosenberg boys, who were older than me, but they were doing at Earlham and around there. And I got involved with really running discussion groups at the Friends meeting in Richmond for young people. That became one of the jobs I had, was kind of doing young people's work at the Friends meeting in Richmond, and also in kind of organizing in the high schools of Richmond study groups about American history and imperialism. And so that my Earlham experience, like my George School experience, was not so much informed by studies, but really informed by what was happening in our society and what needed to be spoken to. And there was a chance to go. I was very interested in what other societies were thinking and doing. And I think partly because of my feeling some responsibility because of my father's experience in the military in East Asia, to learn about East Asia. And I went to the program that Earlham had with Great Lakes College Association to Japan and Waseda University, and learned Japanese. And I didn't plan on ending up in Japan. I wanted to go to China and learn what was happening there, but wasn't able to do that because I could only get a 3-day visa. At that time, we had not have relationships with China. But I ended up mostly in Japan being involved with Quakers once again at the Quaker meeting in Japan, but also with Buddhists and others in starting Beheiren and Friends of Beheiren, which was the big Japanese peace organization. And we started working on coffee houses, getting and forging documents, getting people out of the military to Sweden, and on kind of trying to shut down the different air bases that were shipping napalm to Vietnam. And it was another huge learning time, just a whole different culture kind of and joining forces. And that's where I also got involved with Koreans for the first time. Um, and both of those things have continued to today. But I came back and I did finish Earlham, and I went on to the University of Washington to study more about Asian politics, but I didn't stay there long because mostly my department was involved with training people in the military and the CIA to be able to do interrogating work in Vietnam. And I had a girlfriend who was a Willoughby, one of George's daughters, and we invited George Lakey to come out there to the University of Washington and lead us in some nonviolent training and social change. And George and I became fast friends from that time period. And in many conflicts over should I stay in school, or was this the time in our country where something else had to happen? And all of it was coming together for me about not staying in school for many reasons. George invited me to come back to Philadelphia and join the Quaker Action Group, AQAG, and that's what I did. And while I was at the University of Washington, I also became acquainted with reevaluation counseling. And it was very useful to me in so many ways through all the different things I'd been through. I don't think I'd cried since I was 13 years old. And that I found people and friends who listened to me. And as I worked through some of the traumas I'd been through in these different movements and social change organizations and just my life. And so when I came back to Philadelphia, and I was around with AQAG as one of their last employees, and it was a time period when we were developing the movement for a new society and the Philadelphia Life Center. And that was another big thing. It was like, it brought together the idea of what community could actually be and the value of community in changing society, the value of really challenging each other to be our best selves and to be God's children. And so M&S became a really important thing to me. And I started helping to develop M&S groups around the world and started going back to Japan and eventually Korea to develop M&S groups there with old friends from Waseda and Beheran. And so there's a lot to say about Movement for a New Society, but it was a lot of learning experiences. Like, I was part of a medical collective and I learned EMT skills. I got involved. It's like, I can't describe, but it's like there's something that calls me when trauma is present to show up. So there are a number of times when I was called to save people's lives in different ways, which each one has a lot of content to it as far as what life is worth and how important every individual's life is worth. I think that's also the time period when I started working with the American Friends Service Committee with the Korea Policy Group and helped to form some of those early documents around peace in Korea, and met Hang Woo Lee and Ham Suk-han, when he came to here. And that became a very, the FSC and what they were doing was important to me, and especially the choir program. And so the coming together of M&S and the idea that we could live a godly life with each other in community and release each other to actually make the society we dream possible. Like, just has been something that has stayed in my mind. And that's happened over and over again for me, mostly through relationships and staying true to relationships that I've been in. So during that time period, I became an early childhood teacher. I've had so many interesting jobs that I've had. You know, first of all, you know, working in my family's business, I, you know, got to be a truck driver. I got to be a linotype operator. I got to be, you know, like work in the bindery. I've got to park cars. I've been a logger and one of the last river runners that's out there. You know, I've been a house painter. The idea of having work, good work, and working hard, but that releases you to be able to follow calling, became very central to M&S and my thinking about things. And during that process and thinking about nonviolence and all we were doing to end the war and other things, I started noticing, where does violence actually start? You know, where are people's good hearts? Where is the power of goodness actually interfered with? And from my counseling experience, it looked like it was all in the very early years of life. You know, I was part of an educational collective and did nonviolent training at universities and graduate schools and for military folks, for all kinds of different people. But that just seemed like one had to pay attention to what happened in the early stages of life. And I joined Stephanie Judson in one of the, with the early childhood or the Nonviolence in Children's Project at PYM, and started working in some different schools doing that kind of work, and then decided to become an early childhood teacher and learned a lot as one of the only men doing that work at that time. We did a lot of work on sexism and men's oppression kind of in M&S in that period too. So I started a lot of different relationships that have been very true to, and have followed the lead of dear friends to things that make a difference in the world. You know, learning how to become an ally. So one of those friends was Hang Woo Lee, and he would just tell me to do impossible things. And I'd say, I don't know how to do that. He'd say, get Joan Baez to come to Korea. Yeah, I don't know Joan Baez. He'd say, can you put up the Korean comfort women in your house? I don't know. And he wasn't the only person. There was a Nicola Geiger, there were many others. But I said, okay, I've been called. I will follow. I will do what I can. The same was true with Margaret Scutch, who was an amazing innovator in early childhood. And with a number of the parents at St. Mary's, where I was working, we decided to start our own school based on many of the ideas of reevaluation counseling that we can, supporting parents and supporting young people, we can help people keep the process of healing open for themselves at an early age. And we can help people stick together and notice that we're doing this together, and that we can contradict young people's oppression. And that's how we started our family center here in West Philadelphia. I met Taylor Fromm. I met Dorothy Stoneman. And the idea that youth builds, that there's a whole portion of our society which has been turned on because of racism, because of classism, that we can do something about by demanding as human beings that they be thought about and resourced. And Dorothy started Youth Build USA, and I, along with John Gallery and some others, talked Taylor Fromm into starting Youth Build Philadelphia, which has grown into a beautiful long-term organization that's changed the lives and possibilities for many people in our city. The same was true. I met my friend Abitomo Odenkara, who was a refugee helped by Quakers to come to this country from Idi Amin in Uganda. And she was also an early childhood teacher. We met in a seminar of Margaret Scutch's for a week. And I taught her counseling. We listened to each other. She told me her plans to go back and start a violent rebel movement in Uganda. And by the end of our talking together, she decided she'd go back and start a school in Uganda, which would be a center for peace and unity. And that school has become that. It's the only place that takes in people from all different religious groups and child soldiers and their children, and women who were sex slaves and their children. And that's become something that Pamela and I and our family has been involved with for a long time. I met Jacek Stremenechny and Maya, who restarted the Jewish movement in Poland after, in so many different ways. But we became close friends, and that family, Jacek's family and our family have become like one over many years. And some of those pictures you saw were of us kayaking together, but we did some of the early democracy work in Poland after the fall of the Soviet Union's control there. And I got to teach nonviolent social change to the student movement in Poland through Jacek's help. And we still stay connected and do many things together and in those families. Okay, we're at a time, I think, another 20 minutes. Let's take another 2-minute break. I'll show you our pictures one more time. When we take this break, stand up, move, get your breathe. I'm sharing a lot, I'm not in person with you, and I would like to touch you all. And this is the best I could do here with this. So I'm going to talk just about 10 more minutes, and then let there be a chance for people to ask questions or for us to worship together. So I think I was saying that there's so many different other pieces of this, but that I think that where my faithfulness has come is kind of in connection with people and networking people together to be able to create, to move towards what we would want as God's society. Part of that has been with Tasha also, in our support group for Vanessa. They, getting to be, with Vanessa in as um, her accompaniment in a number of different situations. And, part of it is like with new people that I keep meeting, like the Korea work that we're doing now, there are many young people that I have met and made dear friends with. Part of it is the connection that we've made somewhat accidentally and somewhat from my childhood, kind of trying to discover what is the truth of our history with Indigenous people, and maybe the thin connection I have of Indigenous heritage with the Lenni Lenape people. And that through Pamela's sister, the connection we've made with the people on the Six Nations up in Canada. And because of, I guess, my commitment to young people's liberation and what that really means to kind of listen deeply to people, that that I think we have so many children who are part of our family, and so many families that are part of our family. Pamela and I can't even count how many people have lived in our house over the years, but it approaches 100 or more. And everyone has been a learning experience and a gift. We currently live with our oldest son, Paul, and two of his friends. Being a father has been a big, interesting challenge through this lifetime. Being, a godparent to people, to two children on the Six Nations, having children in Uganda that we're thinking about. And that I've been very dedicated to spreading the ideas of reevaluation counseling and being able to listen deeply to each other. So in that organization, I play two big roles, one of which kind of is as a teacher of counseling and a person who organizes the teachers of counseling in New Jersey, and the other one being the reference person for the development of family work around the world. So I've done a lot of traveling, helping people set up preschools in different countries. Nadine Hoover lived with us for a while with one of her daughters, and we have been, very involved with Friends Peace Teams and her work in that way too. I've lost some of my dearest comrades. Hang Wului died last year. Abitamo died a little bit longer ago. And all of the questions of being an old person at this point, how do you continue on a movement when your guide and spiritual accountability person has died? What do you do? What is my role now with reunification of Korea and the ending of the possibility of nuclear war? What is my role now with the school that we support and are on the board of in Uganda, when there's so many things that I can't do in traveling? And then this gift and curse of cancer came my way last year. And I say it's a gift because it contradicted something that was an early impression in my life that has been contradicted many times, but I forget that I'm not alone. That, and what I've built around me and through all these connections is solid and strong. everything that I was doing was able to go forward with other people. And that they weren't going to discard me because I was old. No, people came through for me, including many of you in our meeting, in very, very essential ways. And it reconfirmed my decision that I made when I was 15 years old in my prayer to God, if I get to keep on living and be alive, I will not hold back on loving all people and being out front with my love for people. So I think that's where I'm going to end today. There's so many pieces to this, and I am working right now to try to write up this experience with cancer, because I think it might be helpful to some people with some of the things that I've learned from it. I'm going to end with a poem. And this is a poem I wrote a while ago too. But I haven't talked a lot about my mystical connections with our universe. Mostly talked about my connections with people, and there are long lists of people I'd love to tell you about who have been amazing people in this world. But this is a little bit about the magic that surrounds us every moment and how God surrounds us every moment. This is a poem called Decision in Progress. The hurried walker can miss the universe. It's all before him, the moss growing into the stream bed, the arching trunks of trees intricately bending towards the light, the insects and birds that come to investigate each intrusion. All the hurried walker is aware of is how fast his pace, the hunger in his belly, the obstacle of the creek, how the trees darken the sky, and how he wishes the world would be without insects. Some humans have a special genius that transcends this hurried view. St. Francis called birds to his hand and understood the talk of small animals. Einstein could visualize the furthest atom and predicted sights we may not see for years. Special gifts were theirs, but they are human gifts we all share. In this universe, all is possible. All yearn to see. Ours is to decide our pace and remember and reclaim an awareness to reality.